Hello, everybody who has just joined us, and welcome to our webinar on teaching tips for Cambridge IGCSE and O-Level Global Perspectives. I'm Laura Rogers from Cambridge University Press, and I'll be hosting this webinar for our speaker, Fleur McLennan. Thank you to everyone who is joining us today. I can see lots of you saying hello in the chat box, which is great to see. And this also gives me the opportunity to say, please keep the chat box to hand, as Fleur will be encouraging some participation throughout today's session, and we'd love to hear from you. I am delighted to introduce our speaker today, Fleur McLennan. Fleur is the author of our new Cambridge IGCSE and O-Level Global Perspectives coursebook and teacher's resource. Fleur has been involved in the Global Perspectives curriculum since its pilot, and works with teachers worldwide on developing and implementing the subject in schools. Fleur is passionate about helping teachers with practical strategies and tools to progress learning for all. So without further ado, I would like to hand over to Fleur for our webinar today.
Hello, thank you very much, Laura. Well, welcome everybody. It's a very big pleasure for me to be here with you today, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening for some of you. And, you know, thank you for giving up your time to be with me today and learn a little bit more about how to make global perspectives really sing in your classroom. So can I have the next slide, please, Laura? That would be lovely. Let's make a start, shall we? As Laura introduced me, I have just authored the course book for students and also the teacher's resource to help you on your journey, no matter where you are in terms of your experience with global perspectives. So I'm trying to make it as user-friendly as possible, and I really want to get you to be the best possible GP teacher you can be. So I hope you all invest good money in getting them and getting the most from them. Okay, so what are we doing today? Can I have the next slide, please, Laura? We've got a fabulous menu for you today. So in the webinar today, I'm going to talk about the gifts that teaching this course can bring across subject areas and curriculum spaces. I'm also going to balance this. You know, it's a slightly salty acknowledgement of some limitations and real world issues that sometimes get in the way of teachers thinking about how to teach global perspectives. So I'll give you an example. One of the limitations that I had when I was writing the books is that I wanted to help absolutely everyone. And I realized I couldn't. So in making that realization, I'll say, it means I had to find a middle ground, a middle space where I could accommodate what I want you to engage with when you're teaching your students, but also I had to be aware that I didn't know what's happening in your classroom, in your schools, in your cultures, in your languages, and how they interact. So there was lots of things that I had to compromise on. And that's a real world issue when you're doing a global curriculum. So what I'm saying is I strongly encourage you as teachers to adapt what I've written and take it deeper, because it will suit your own teaching needs. You know, take what I've done as the springboard to make yourself, you know, a better teacher. With that in mind, we're looking at a lovely selection of mains today. We're going to concentrate on chapter 4 of the course book, which is actually looking at the skill of research. You may already be aware that some of your learners that you've come across in your classrooms, their research skills are pretty good. They use it wisely. They're fantastic at taking in and using what they read and what they see, and using it productively in their writing. But others, well, they don't, you know. So we're going to look at how we can pull apart this idea of research. We're going to look at a really interesting and easy to, it's an easy strategy to put into your classroom. And we're going to look at reading positions. The topic that we're specifically going to look at is education for all. And within this one, I'm going to show you how to approach trickier topics that are on the syllabus. So ones that encourage us to think hard about what we know, but can perhaps help us to shift into slightly uncomfortable areas. And I'm going to talk more about that later. I also think that being uncomfortable in a learning space for us as teachers is really important, because Global Perspectives is asking us and our students to lend a critical eye and understand how we are all both part of global problems, and we can all work together to be part of the solution. And this will change a lot throughout all of our lives. But that's quite a heavy load, that, isn't it? So my advice is for today, between the main and the dessert, is to not shy away from addressing some of the more complex and seemingly difficult topics, because those are the ones that can sometimes address the changes that we need to take place in our classrooms. So getting back to the skill level though, I'm going to introduce you to a tool that I use to support and engage students in critically understanding texts that they read or they see. And we're going to have a chance to work through a text together while we're on this webinar. And at the end, although I'm not focused on getting the answer correct, I am 100% sure that you will all have the correct answer. So from there, we're going to head on to a dessert, a delectable selection of questions and, drizzled with sweet answers by the end of the session, where you can ask me all sorts of things. Hopefully, one of us here on the panel today will be able to answer. But it does come with a little disclaimer though. So Laura, can I have the next slide, please? Okay, so on the menu for today, we have sweets and we also have broccoli seeds. The disclaimer that I have from you about what I can offer, it comes actually, I've borrowed it from a fabulous theorist called Vanessa de Oliveira Andriotti, and it's really simple. What you want from me is to give you the candy, to give you the sweets. It's something that will gratify you. It tastes sweet. It's really nice. They're colourful. It's bright, but it also doesn't last very long. What I'm going to offer you are the broccoli seeds, because these broccoli seeds, you will have to plant them. You'll have to grow them. It'll take time. You'll have to apply care and love in order to bring it to maturity. And actually, broccoli is far more nourishing to your body and your mind than any of the sweets. Okay, so those are my broccoli seeds, and I will be giving them to you as we go on through the webinar. Can I have the next slide, please? Let's get you involved with this, people. Okay, so we're going to have a quick poll on thoughts, gifts, and aspirations. Really simple question. What do you want your learners to gain from studying IGCSE Global Perspectives? Just choose one for me. Do you want them to learn how to be agents of change now and in the future? Do you want to deepen their understanding about real-world issues and problems? Do you want them to work together to realise their potential and analyse, critique and find solutions for complex problems facing the planet? That's a big one. Or do you want to build their capacity to be responsible towards others rather than a responsibility for others? It's quite big ideas there, people. So let's see what you are saying. We've got pretty even trends happening at the moment. There's lots of answers coming in, which is great. So it's looking like a slightly stronger trend towards C. So if you haven't yet voted, try now. Okay, I think it's stabilized. Yes, so C is what people are mostly saying. Let's work together to realise potential, analyse, critique and find solutions for complex problems facing the planet. That's a big one. You're thinking hard, teachers out there. Well done. So you will notice, though, that get good exam results wasn't on the list. And this is because the overarching aim for Global Perspectives is for you and your students to participate in a journey. And that's going to give them skills that go far beyond just a simple grade, a simple exam, which are not simple. And these are the 21st century skills that we need. And exam results are one way of assessing, but when we deal with Global Perspectives, we're actually dealing with the multiverse of perspectives. And who's to say that a student who gets a poor exam result will not have the capability to expand and grow and become excellent in the future? Our role is to build their capacity. So to work together to build their understandings so that they have, and we as teachers as well, can realize how awesome we are all in being able to make change now and in the future. So the answer for this particular poll is you're all correct. All of them are what we do as part of our practice as Global Perspectives teachers. However, we do need to acknowledge where there's some boundaries and some limitations. So these need to be acknowledged as well, because this comes up time after time. If I've met you before, we would have talked about it. So the first problem, the first limitation is time. It is always going to be against you. There is never enough time. So we have to be realistic in how we plan for Global Perspectives, and also how we think about how it fits into our school and into our curriculum area. Number two, the resources that we use in our teaching, not just the course book, not just the teacher's resource, but your natural resources, even your own energy that you give to your teaching. It's really precious. So look after yourself, choose your resources carefully, make sure you can get lots from it, rather than having lots of resources that offer a little. So choose very carefully. And finally, this comes up a lot as well, limitations to student engagement, maybe even starting them on being engaged. It is really difficult. I know, I'm a teacher as well. So much is happening to our teenagers, so much is happening around them in the world. It's really tricky to keep them engaged with something that seems too big for their minds. So do remind them from time to time that being respectful and being engaged with their community and the world is the highest form of cool that there actually is, okay? But there's also some limitations when it comes to thinking about this course and how to approach it in terms of teaching. So again, with the broccoli seeds, all I can offer you is this understanding that there are no absolute certainties, okay? I don't know if all of your broccoli seeds will grow, okay? So there's no absolute certainties. There's no such thing as a fixed identity or a fixed perspective or a fixed community. All things change, all things develop, grow, decline, accelerate over time. And more importantly, when we're thinking about the future, there is no one single agreed future for everyone. It will look, feel, and be experienced differently by everyone. Okay, there's a lot to think about there. Ooh. Okay, let's carry on then. Let's have a look at us as teacher potentials. Next slide, please, Laura. Fantastic. So here is a slightly simpler version of where you sit. You are the magnifying glass. That is you right in the middle. Your role is to facilitate the learning, okay? It's also true of our students because they've got to practice this, okay? They must practice Global Perspectives thinking and doing regularly, to be aware of what is happening around them in order to get great results. And that's working together, working with you, and working individually. It doesn't have to be an exam. So we are the magnifying glass that condenses that potential down into the spark that lights the fire. Without us, there's nothing. Okay, so that's how important we are. I love that picture, by the way. I think it's really clever. I didn't do it. Okay, let's have the next slide, please. Let's look at tricky topics. Okay, we're going to get into our overarching topic about education for all. And there doesn't seem to be anything tricky about education for all. This topic might seem like it's quite easy, but it could also link to other topics that are harder to address. And so let's dig into that a bit deeper. Education is really strongly linked to social identity for students, for teachers, for schools, communities, even nations. So social identity is the feeling of belonging to a particular group. So you can see how a school will have its own social identity at various levels, within and also without its walls. So where we need to start thinking a bit deeper about education is about who's left behind or who's not included. So we might even be able to identify whole nations that have based their social identity around a very narrow set of ideas, particularly when it comes to education. And therefore, their perspective on inclusion might be very different from our own. It's not to say that one is right and one is wrong, they're just different. So if we dig in further, we can also see that without a sense of belonging to a group, or if we're actively excluded from a group, we can start to unpack, and you can see as I'm moving through the top of the chart there, we can start to unpack how inequality begins, how it starts. And we can also address this idea of inequality being linked to poverty, how they work together to become a spiral which goes down. And we can also look at how often poverty and inequality as two issues are seen as and represented as a set of poor choices that individual people make rather than a set of circumstances that they find themselves in. So it's in that space that there's opportunity to research more on why is this a common perspective? How did that come into being? Who started it? And who benefits from promoting that idea? So these are questions that help us unpack these tricky ideas. Similarly, if we look at the lower section of it, education for all can also link to social identity and inclusion. And then we might also look at arts in society. We might perhaps explore why certain art is valued and certain art forms are valued and some are not. And what this does is links back to feelings of belonging to a group. But perhaps if you're looking at arts in society, you're looking at the people creating the art perhaps being outside of what is considered normal in society. We might then link that back to education and ask questions like, well, why are the arts not as valued in education as maths and science? And then can we really say that education is for everyone or is for all? So there's lots of big questions there. So this is a way of getting into those harder topics. So let's unpack something as a group. Can I have the next slide, please, Laura? Okay, here's the front cover of UNESCO's Global Monitoring Report. This is the team report in 2019 on Sustainable Development Goal number 4. If you're not familiar with your Sustainable Development Goals, number 4 is the Education for All development goal. So this actually looks like a very simple text, But when we read it critically and by asking some questions, we can also link it to another topic like political power and action. But just for now, in your chat box, I want you to answer yes or no. No maybes, no explanations, just a simple yes or no in your chat box. Go for it now. So I can see, oh, there's lots and lots of yeses. So do you agree with the messages presented in this text? There's lots of yeses. Okay, very good. So as we are going through, and what I'm seeing here is absolutely perfect, wonderful, you're all correct. This is called a preferred reading. Basically, this means that you understand the message that is being presented to you and you agree with it with no questions asked, okay? Our students do this whenever they read just about anything because they haven't practiced other ways. Not to say that you haven't, but this is their preferred reading. They agree straight away with the main message of this particular text. We sometimes forget, though, that questioning is really important, and to research properly, we need to be critical to uncover other possibilities and implications that all texts have. So let's have a look at the next slide. So you can see that these ones are slightly different. They're slightly trickier, a little bit salty. This is about oppositional reading. So for those of you, and I don't think there was any that answered no in the chat box, or maybe you even thought it, but you typed yes anyway. You were either testing the boundaries with me, just like students do, or what you were doing was reading more deeply into the text. An oppositional reading disagrees with the messages in the text. Importantly, the opposition might be on an ideas level, so like the top comment where education should be about local traditions and values, not global networks. Okay, so that might be one of the things that builds an oppositional reading. The next one down is more of a text level. So they're looking at how the text is put together. The second one kind of examines the picture and it looks at, you know, who's represented and whether it's realistic or unrealistic. And what this does is connects also to a personal level. They bring their own experience and knowledge to the reading as well. And in the last comment, you can see how this person, who is definitely a teacher because they identify themselves as a teacher, how they're automatically linking the topic to political power and action. What they're doing in their comment here is they are identifying structures and systems that have much more control over education than they do as a single teacher. So they're calling for this to be acknowledged, and to take it further, they would need to probably do some research in how education policy can be influenced for change, which is the action that we encourage with our students. Okay, let's have a look at the next slide. So when we're looking at a negotiated reading, we are looking at, as you can see in this slide, what we see in the oppositional comments have become further questions that the reader or you would like answered before you actually come to a firm decision. So you can see that at the top we have, you know, what are the implications between working together? How do people in different places understand education? Who needs to work together? Who's not represented? And then finally, who decides that this is true, that education does have a key role in helping us? Who benefits? Who loses? So you may agree with some of the parts of this text, and you may oppose some of the others. So we have what's called a negotiated reading. In order to negotiate a reading, you need to be critical and you need to ask those questions of the text. What it does do, and what we want to encourage with our students, is it deepens that understanding about what the text's central message is. But the message has implications about how people understand the message and who might or might not be included. It also links to political power and action by asking, well, who decided that this message was true for everybody, and what power do they have, and why is this important? And we know that this is a big organization because it's actually produced by UNESCO. Can I have the next slide, please? So back on to you, people. Let's have another quick poll. So after thinking about this text in different ways, consider the impact that this information has had on your opinion. Have you, A, maintained your preferred reading? B, have you changed to an oppositional reading? Or C, have you developed a negotiated reading of the text where some parts appeal and some parts don't? Oh, it's really strongly polarized now. It's really good to see. I'm not sure if you can see how the poll is working, but I can, and it's a very, very, very strong polarization. So when you're thinking about this, the strong polarization is towards a negotiated reading of this text at the moment. So we've still got a few to go. What are you thinking, people? Do you still think that you believe this? Maybe you have some more questions. Maybe you're like, no, I don't think this at all. Okay, I think we're just about there. All right, so 74% of you have changed your mind. You have developed a negotiated reading. That is a big change from where we first started. So if you were to do this in your classrooms, this is a very, very simple technique to help our students understand that not everything they read and everything they see needs to be a preferred reading, an accepted reading straight away. So I hope that one helps you. Right, let's go to the next slide. And we will come to our final thoughts. I love this picture. I didn't do this either, but isn't it beautiful? So a final thought about perspectives. So this is kind of summarizing what we've been talking about. Perspectives change and they grow upon the lens that they are looked through. So you can see we all look like beautiful flowers from one angle, but actually we're just bananas, okay? It just depends on the perspective. Global perspectives is that balance. It's between the self, the local, the national, and the global. And each lens comes with its own really complex network and ways of looking at things. So just to remember, there are absolutely no absolute certainties, okay? There's no such thing as a fixed identity, a fixed perspective, or a fixed community. All things change and develop over time. Most importantly, when we're thinking about the future, and we want our students to think about the problems that they're going to face, maybe not so overwhelming for them to think that there's no singular agreed future for anyone, because it will look and feel different to everyone. Okay, so those are the broccoli seeds that I want you to go along and grow. So with that, I'm going to hand back to Laura, because I think we should have some questions.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much, Fleur, for that fantastic presentation. It's so interesting to hear about teaching global perspectives from someone who has so much knowledge and experience in the subject. I loved seeing the example of interpreting a text and how your opinions of a particular message can change when you consider it from different perspectives. And I think our participants today have really enjoyed the interactive aspects of the session as well, and learning from an actual example that you could use in the lesson. So that's really great. So now we're going to move on to a question and answer session. So if you have any questions for Fleur, please can you pop them in the Q&A box and we will answer as many as we can. And I do apologise as well if I pronounce any names incorrectly. So let's take a look at the Q&A. We also ran this session earlier today and we had a lot of questions then, so it'll be interesting to see if we've got any similar themes as well. So let's take a look. So we've got some questions coming in. So the first question we've got from Michael, who says, can Fleur please elaborate more on the negotiated reading and the others? So I assume maybe the other types of reading, so preferred, oppositional, negotiated readings.
So generally, if we think, let's start with preferred reading. If we think about any simple text that we have, so even on our screens at the moment, we're looking at the Global Perspectives books and we go, oh, okay, and we have no questions about it, okay? That would be a preferred reading. We get it. It's a book. We can buy it. And that's a wonderful thing. This is mostly how our students operate when they read anything. So when we're looking at an oppositional reading, so this is where you start to have to be critical. You need to start asking questions. Well, who benefits from this book? Who's included in it? Who loses out? So this is something like, well, me as the author, I benefited, you know, so, but it's not open to you. As you looking at the book, you might be going, well, it's just a book. But me as the author goes, I wrote a book. So I benefit, you would benefit, but only if you buy it. Okay, so there's lots of questions. We start to see that there is a working here and there is an editorial process as well. So, which is not always clear and open. So for example, I didn't design the book cover, someone else did. Okay, so when we look at a preferred one, we're agreeing straight away. When we're looking at oppositional, we're not agreeing at all. We're rejecting it. And when we're looking at a negotiated reading, we're seeing some things that really appeal to us. Actually, I like this idea that it's by Cambridge University Press. That appeals to me. That tells me they've got a lot of authority. I'm not so sure about these knotted pieces of twine, because this tells me that it's going to be really hard and complex. So we have a negotiated understanding of how we're reading the text. So you could have this in terms of, I'll give you some examples where you can use it in the classroom with posters for movies. You could use it with candy bars or chocolate bars to see who would like it and who wouldn't like it, because they're basing it on a very snap decision without questioning that, well, with movies, it's all about getting your money when you go to the cinema. And with candy or chocolate, it's all about kind of health, really. It's not good for you, but it makes you want to eat it. So we can adapt this idea of preferred, negotiated and oppositional readings to lots and lots of different texts that we read. My advice, if you want to use it in the classroom, start it really simple with something really simple. So I'm sitting in my daughter's room at the moment and she has this Ed Sheeran CD on her desk. And we might ask, why has it got divide when he's trying to bring people together? You know, there's lots of things, but start with a very simple text that students can start asking questions about. Okay, I hope that one helps.
Yeah, that was a great answer. And it's really interesting. You can pretty much do it with anything that you can look at, see, interpret. I like how you use the book covers as an example, and how you could interpret the kind of visual on the front cover in different ways. So it's really interesting. So the next question we have is, can you please suggest some collaborative activities which can be conducted for the above topic. Now, I'm not sure exactly which topic. I'm assuming maybe education for all, because that was the kind of main focus of the session. But please do correct me if I'm wrong. But yes, collaborative.
Yeah, so I'm gonna reframe that a little bit, because it's not the topic that carries the weight, if you like, it's the skill. And so the skill we were looking at is research. Okay, so if you were to do something like this in terms of a collaborative structure, there are lots of suggestions within the course book and also within the teacher's resource. But you might have an idea where, let's look at, I don't know, girls' education. And you might send in your group of students that you've got together, they might work out that they're going to do a case study where someone's going to look at Norway, someone's going to look at Ethiopia, someone's going to look at Thailand. And they might combine to see how there are different perspectives on education for girls in those 3 different case studies. And that's a way that they can have autonomy, so they can work individually to get an answer, but actually they're working collaboratively to bring out what are the common themes here, what are the differences, what can we learn from this? Yeah, so maybe that's the way forward. But just to be really clear, it's always the skill that comes first, and the topic is the vehicle that drives that learning forward. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. It's very important to remember that the skill comes first. That's a great answer. Thank you. We've got another question from Asaya. Cultural perspectives in team projects, how should they be reflected in the outcome?
Cultural perspectives. Well, cultural perspectives are really important because they can be personal, local, national, and sometimes they can be global as well. I think they need to be acknowledged because culture is a very, very important part of identity. But how that's done within a project would have to be very dependent upon lots of different things. I know that sounds like I'm not offering you an answer, but it's very difficult to be able to give an answer like that without knowing what you're specifically talking about. What I would say though is culture shouldn't be excluded. Culture is very, very, very important to many of the topics. And it is also important with getting the students engaged with what happens within their school, their local community, and within their own nation as well. So one of the questions I got asked in the last session was, well, how do I separate culture and nationality? And I said that perhaps you could start with looking at something simple like language. So every country on earth has a national language, one that is recognized, but it might not always be the language that is used. And that's where you've got the cultural elements coming in. So nation is one thing, but culture operates in many different forms around that idea of nation, if that makes sense. I hope it does. It's the broccoli seed I'm giving you anyway.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Fleur. So the next question is from Martin. What would be a good alternative when you do not have access to computers and internet in class or at home / in their dorm, since lots of lessons rely on researching by students online?
So connection is a problem. I don't like computers myself. I'm one of those old people that like books and paper. Look, there is no substitute for a library, okay? A library with books in it. Any information source, credible or not, still becomes an information source. Interviewing people, talking with family, talking with friends, talking with teachers also becomes an important information source that we can use, and we don't often use it in the right way. So these books particularly look at how to go and interview and get the right answers. but also you don't need an awful lot of connectivity or computers in order to do good research. It's about having a very good critical eye for our students and developing that within them. So getting them to collect resources, even if it's something like, you know, a CD that they might have in their room, or I can't think of what else I can, I'll grab one of my other things, like one of these. Okay, it's just a spring, it's a slinky spring, but this could be an excellent resource to look at how we treat the environment, what we take from the environment. Can it be broken down? Can it be reused? Lots of questions to do with those things without having to go online.
Yeah, absolutely. There's always different things you can do that don't involve going online or computers and the internet. So yeah, that's great. I've just been having a look at the chat box as well, and I've picked up a question in there from Sharon, who says, in GP, oftentimes learners tend to go away from the topic being discussed in the class. What measures can you suggest to not really kind of stray away from what is actually being discussed?
Yeah, so the wander, the classroom wander, I have that a lot in my lessons. Look, I think you as the facilitator will know when it's wandered too far, and it's up to you as the teacher to bring it back, rein it in when it needs to, or redirect. So it doesn't necessarily have to stop, but when it's going into somewhere that maybe is raising emotions or they're getting off track, it's a good idea to reorient or redirect that in specific ways. Now, I often do stop, eyes to me, this is what I'm hearing. How can we move on from here? And then give it back and see how they take it on. But I also have, if it's raised emotions too much, or perhaps they're getting a little bit silly, I just stop it and go, let's stop this for now and come back to it when we're ready. Okay, and to think about it in a different way. But again, I think it is becoming increasingly difficult to keep control of doesn't even need to be control really, but to have an authoritative voice when you're supposed to be a facilitator in global perspectives. Let them run with it as much as you can, but rein it in if you feel it's gone too far. Yeah, absolutely. I can imagine you obviously want to encourage lots of discussion, and if the students are getting really engaged, it's like a really positive thing, but equally they need to be staying on track and kind of focusing on the skills that they need to be learning. So yeah, that's really helpful. Thank you. So next question is from Rushi, who says, sometimes it's difficult to engage learners in a particular issue despite engaging activities, specifically the ones who aren't performing up to the mark, although they actively participate when it comes to taking an action for a particular issue. So any teaching strategies for helping students become engaged in different issues? Oh, that's a tricky one. So engage, I get asked about this all the time, and I'm going to give you a broccoli seed. So the thing that matters most is that students have agency, and agency is the ability to act. And that can sometimes be when they don't act, when they don't engage, when they don't respond, or they don't do anything. That is their agency, and they are acting how they feel, whether it's appropriate or not. Well, that's a different set of conversations. That's more about behavior. But if they're not engaging with the topic or the research or with others, I always start with a one-to-one. What is it that's getting to them? Maybe it's something really simple, like they don't understand. Maybe they don't like it. And that is good agency as well, because once we have a starting point, we can think of ways to actually recover the situation. I tend to make my conversations with disengaged students very quiet, very nonchalant, so nobody's really paying attention to us, but I do make sure that I check up on them quite consistently to make them do the bare minimum that I expect. Because it's important, because it is infectious sometimes in the classroom as well. So you want everybody to be working well, engaged and productive at the same time. So it's a fine balancing act, but you need to work out a way that works for you.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it would definitely be a balancing act, particularly when there might be some kind of sensitive topics that you're discussing, or issues that students have a personal kind of perspective on. So yeah, it's definitely good to sort of have that one-on-one interaction and make sure that they're happy and that they understand the topic and everything. That's great. So we have time for a few more questions, which is great. So we've got one from Alia, who is asking if you would recommend or suggest that it could be helpful for schools to collaborate between each other for team projects, because in order to practically know perspectives, communication is imperative.
So while it's not, it's not an official thing, we don't require it as part of the course, any collaboration that you have between schools is going to be so beneficial for any part of Global Perspectives. And if you can't, because you might be in a remote area or a rural area, or just not near any other schools, if you can't connect with any other schools, go to other teachers in your school and connect with them. That cross-curricular talking about topics, talking about research skills, what do you do? I do this, what works, what doesn't. This is really important for this curriculum area to work successfully in any school. It's not a spirit of competition, it should be a spirit of collaboration and collegiatism where we're working together, because this is a very, very big and challenging curriculum as well. And it crosses all subject areas. So please I encourage everybody strongly, go and make those connections with other schools, with other teachers, within your own teaching block and your own schools as well.
Exactly, yes. What a better way to learn global perspectives than to collaborate with each other. Exactly. So we've got another question from Bushra, who says there's a little bit of confusion around what is meant by national perspective. So whether it's a national perspective means the perspective of any particular nation, or if you're talking about the nation in which you're residing. Yeah.
Oh, okay. So yeah, I could see how that is tricky, because national perspective, as I'm defining it, is the national perspective given by the current sitting government, saying what its values are, and as a nation. So whether you are someone like me that has moved from Australia to Britain, so I've now got two nations that I'm aware of, but these are important things as well, because the national perspective that I'm talking about is more about the values and the political values that are given as part of the governance of that country and what that country believes. Your nationality as you as an individual, that might change, because we can migrate, we can, move about, we can take jobs in other countries, and that's also a valid perspective as well. Okay, so definitely my definition is from the country that is giving out those values. You could define it in other ways as well, and that's still valid.
Great, thank you. I think we might have time for one or two further questions. And then just to say that if we haven't got to your question, we will be following up with answers on our Brighter Thinking blog as well. So if you have asked a question, we haven't got to an answer, then be sure to check back on our blog, and hopefully Georgia or Tina can just drop our blog link in the chat as well. So let's pick another couple of questions. We've got one from Suda, who asks, how is the analysis skill conducted with upper secondary learners?
So with analysis, all the skills link together. So whether you are looking specifically at research like we did today or analysis, you'll find that something like the reading positions that we looked at operate in both. They work really well for developing research skills, but it is also an analytical tool. A reading position is an analytical tool. When you're looking at something like analysis, and we had this question come up in the last session as well, analysis comes with maturity, unfortunately. So if you're trying it out with younger learners, you'll find that their analysis is not as sophisticated as what it will be with other learners who are perhaps a little bit older. When you're building analysis skill in your classroom, and you can see this in the course book as well as in the teacher's resource, you need to start small. If they're not developing the skill fast, keep the resource small, keep the analysis, what you're expecting them to do, gentle, if you like, to build their confidence in it, because that is often one of the key tools. They don't feel confident, so they don't try hard. Okay, it affects their motivation. So keep it small, keep the resources simple, keep the analysis simple. Something like the reading positions is a really good place to start.
Okay, great, thank you. Let's see if we can fit in one more question. So we've got another question from Michael, who's asking kind of, when you're dealing with opinions and facts and asking questions kind of about those things, sometimes there can be statements that you find are opinions that maybe aren't kind of part of haven't been sort of put into the question, or like they haven't been put down as a suggested answer or interpretation, but they might just come from another perspective, for example. So yeah, how would you kind of deal with those situations, if that makes sense?
Yeah, so one of the things that I look at quite a lot in my PhD research is looking at controversial issues in the classroom, and it's more about how the teacher handles it, because students are very good in working out how to get maximum impact through what they say. So often the opinion stated as fact, or just dropped in there, can totally derail or change how a conversation is flowing. So depending on you as a teacher and how you teach, you can either stop it altogether and put in rules about how to conduct yourself in a group discussion, or you could reorient the discussion, as we mentioned earlier, about changing the flow, changing the way, or perhaps just redirecting it in certain ways. Or you could actually make it a point and unpack it further. And in a lot of times, my understanding is students saying these really quite meaty things that do take us a moment and perhaps make us a bit nervous. They do it for effect. So if you then say, well, how did you come to this realization, or where did you get this information from? And if you ask them to unpack it, often they will, so I will say, dial it down. They will just go, oh, I can't answer these questions. Then there's opportunity for you to unpack things about, let's say this common thing coming up at the moment, fake news or reinterpreted truths, or however you want to deal with it, but we can actually use that as a teaching point as well. And it is exceptionally important that we do look at things that have ability to change our minds without really having the full understanding of what's going on, because we live in the global era now. Yeah, I hope that helps.
Yes, great answer. Thank you. I think that is probably all we've got time for the Q&A session. So thank you so much to Fleur for your really detailed and interesting answers. That was really great. I think we've had a few questions as well about the resources for Global Perspectives, which you can see on the screen. So my colleagues have been sharing some links in the chat box throughout the session. So you can take a look at our catalogues, or you can have a look at the coursebook sample. So if you haven't got those links, they'll also be shared in the email with you that you will receive in 7 days' time. So that is about all we have time for today. So all that's left to say is just thank you so much for joining us today. We will again be sharing the recording with you, along with the link to the webinar slides, so you can take a look through the examples again, and you'll receive that email 7 days after the webinar. You can also use this email as proof of your attendance. So to find out more about our resources discussed today, please use the links as I've suggested, or speak to your sales representative. And when the webinar ends shortly, there will be a short survey to complete that will pop up on your screens. And we really appreciate any feedback you can give us, because it helps us to improve future sessions and make them even more helpful for you. So any feedback you have, please do let us know. And thank you finally for all of your participation, your comments, getting involved in the polls. It's always good to hear from you and to see kind of like where your thinking is at. So that's always really great to see. And we really appreciate the engagement in the session. And yes, thank you very much to Fleur for your presentation and fantastic answers in the Q&A session. I hope everyone will agree it's been a very informative and engaging session. So thank you very much. Good luck with all of your teaching, and goodbye for now.